right, this is our last video of Unit 4. This is Chapter 13, the Era of Reconstruction. This is after the Civil War, 1865 to 1877. So there's going to be all different ideas on how to bring the Confederate States back into the Union. Okay, so let's look at the devastation. So most of the battles were done in the South because the North was very good about blocking the battles. So the South is left just devastated. You have physical, economic, emotional, cities and towns and farms are going to be ruined over years of fighting. Southerners are facing starvation, poverty. They're not happy campers. They still have strong resentment toward the Union. Especially how federal policies are beginning to reshape. So Southern society, many white Southerners oppose the advancement of formerly enslaved people, right? They're going to resist efforts to grant them their civil rights and any type of economic opportunity. So this resistance is going to lay the groundwork for future racial tension. And it's also going to raise discriminatory laws like the Black Codes and later Jim Crow. In the Union, they did not have the same destruction, okay? They've strengthened the federal government. They're now trying to empower the government to protect the rights of all citizens in new and transformative ways. During Reconstruction, it's very important that the Congress passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, and these are important for you to know and understand. Remember, the Emancipation Proclamation, that was just a military order, that when they went into a Southern territory, the North, and took over that area and all their property, they then could take the slaves too and free them. But it doesn't end slavery, so you have to have these amendments and you need to know them. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. 1865 ends slavery. The 14th Amendment, 1868, grants citizenship and equal protection under the law to all people born or naturalized in the United States. This is going to include former enslaved people. And the 15th Amendment in 1870 is going to give voting rights regardless of race, color, or previous condition. Now, it does not say gender. This does, or sex, whichever one you want to use. This does not include women. This only includes men. So these amendments are going to lay the foundation for civil rights in America. Their enforcement is going to be challenged for decades. Okay, so we're going to go into different types of Reconstruction policy. This is basically trying to decide, how do we bring these states back into the Union? What do they need to do to kind of gain forgiveness? Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is called Presidential Reconstruction. Okay, so this is what his plan was before he's assassinated, of course. So in 1863, his plan for Reconstruction to bring the states back is known as the 10% plan. He feels like it's a way to kind of reunite the country quickly and peacefully. And he wants to offer presidential pardons to most of the Confederates who pledged loyalty to the Union and the Constitution. All right. So in this, it's also they need to accept the emancipation of the enslaved people. So what he's saying is that once 10% of a state's voters, once they take this oath that they want back in the Union, they pledge their loyalty to the Union, they accept the Constitution, they accept the emancipation of the slaves, meaning that there won't be any slavery. Only 10% of the people who are allowed to vote in each state, if they take this oath, they can then come back in and be readmitted into the Union. That's all they've got to do. So Lincoln's approach is very lenient, okay? And he's hoping to encourage Southern states to return. Many in Congress are going to object to this. They think that is just too easy. It just allows whoever to come back into the Union, and that we're actually going to have disloyal people who are just saying they want to come back to try and regain some power. And they just feel that it just undermines the overall goals. It's just too easy on the states. Okay, that's just a political cartoon. So the next one you have is 1864. You have the radical Republicans in the North, the Congress. They propose what they call the Wade-Davis Reconstruction Plan. They believe it's a stricter alternative to President Lincoln's more lenient plan of 10%. So the congressional approach requires 50% of all the state voters, not 10% like Lincoln, but 50%. They have to take this loyalty oath before they can be readmitted into the Union. All right, so that's important. They also introduced what's called the Ironclad Oath. Make sure you know that the Ironclad Oath is in the Wade-Davis Reconstruction Plan of 1864. You will be tested on that. And you need to know what the Ironclad Oath is. So what it is it demands that individuals swear they had never voluntarily supported the Confederacy or taken up arms against the Union. So this is going to make the condition a lot harder for Southern states to rejoin, because who is going to be able to swear that they didn't support the Confederacy, although they fought for the Confederacy, and they never raised a gun to the Union when they literally fought a war against the Union? So it's meant to make it harder for these Southern states to rejoin. The plan also calls for immediate voting rights for Southern African Americans and allowed only non-Confederates to participate in drafting new state constitutions. So in these Southern states, they have to have this ironclad oath where, first off, they need 50% of their population to swear their allegiance to the Union. Then in the ironclad oath, they also need them to say, hey, we never wanted to go against the Union. We were just stuck here, and we never raised a gun to fight against the Union. Then they need to find, in these Confederate states, non-Confederate supporters who can draft a new state constitution. So that's going to be very hard to do. So people are going to object to this bill. They're going to exercise a pocket veto, and they're not going to sign it before Congress adjourns. And this is the bill's not going to pass. This Reconstruction Plan is not going to work. But it's going to start kind of creating some very radical Republicans that think that, we shouldn't forgive the South, but it's too easy letting them back in. Okay, so then after Lincoln is assassinated, you have President Andrew Johnson, who is the vice president, and he's going to take over. So he's a Southern Democrat. At this time, you did not have to be a part of the same party. The president could be one party, and then the vice president could be another. So Johnson's a Southern Democrat, and he's going to take over the presidency, and he's going to be in charge of Reconstruction, because that's the biggest thing happening. So his plan is to allow Southern states to re-enter the Union once they ratify the 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery. So Johnson appointed these temporary governors in all of the Confederate states to kind of oversee this transition, and he's hoping to quickly reunite the Union. However, his approach is very lenient, and it's believed that he's allowing too many former Confederate leaders to regain power. And Southern legislators begin to pass what they call black codes. These laws are going to restrict the rights and the movement of formerly enslaved people. It's going to pretty much keep them in slavery. So the congressional radical Republicans strongly oppose Johnson's plan. They argue that it fails to protect the newly freed enslaved people. It allows for disloyal leaders to dominate Southern politics. So they refuse to readmit Southern states under Johnson's term, and they begin passing their own Reconstruction laws. And they're going to often override and veto anything that Johnson tries to do. So this is going to be another clash in the government trying to solve this problem of Reconstruction. Okay, so we've already talked a little bit about this, but you have the 14th Amendment, which ensures citizenship and equal protection under the law for African Americans. And this is, of course, going to be a major step towards civil rights. At the same time, you have the radical Republicans in Congress. They're going to push to expand the powers of what's called the Freedmen's Bureau. This is a federal agency. It's created to assist formerly enslaved people with food, education, and legal support. However, President Andrew Johnson, he's going to veto the bill, arguing that Congress had no authority to pass laws until all Southern states were fully represented again. So the Republicans are going to also pass the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which grants citizenship and equal rights to all people born in the United States, regardless of race. Johnson's going to veto that act as well. But Congress responds by overriding his veto, which is a rare, kind of powerful move that signaled, again, growing issues between the president and the Congress. So fearing that the Civil Rights Act might later be overturned or declared unconstitutional, the Republicans are going to push for the 14th Amendment. This is going to enshrine, it's going to protect in the Constitution their freedom of the African American people, and it's going to make it really hard to repeal. But this is going to be an issue with what's considered the Congressional Reconstruction. You have shifting powers away from the presidency and going more towards the legislative branch. Okay, Johnson's impeachment. So in 1868, President Andrew Johnson, he's going to face impeachment after repeatedly clashing with the Congress over Reconstruction policies. So Johnson, who opposes everything the radical Republicans do, everything they do to try and enforce civil rights and reshape the South, Johnson's going to not want. So he becomes this major obstacle to congressional reconstruction, which is the Congress's plan for Reconstruction. So he attempts to dismiss military generals overseeing southern districts. He wants to remove Republican-aligned office holders. So he's undermining the enforcement of the new laws and the new protections that are given to formerly enslaved people. So in response, Congress passes the Tenure of Office Act, which requires Senate approval before the president could remove any cabinet members. So Johnson defies the law by firing the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. And what this does is it triggers the House of Representatives to impeach Johnson because he went against the law. So this is going to lead to a very dramatic trial in the Senate. And in the end, Johnson survives this removal by just one vote. But it makes him the first U.S. president to be impeached. And the trial also highlights kind of we have these very deep divisions in trying to bring the Union back together. Okay, So in 1868, the Congressional Radical Republicans, they take control of Reconstruction. So they're determined to reshape the South. They want to give civil rights to formerly enslaved people. They create the Civil Rights Act of 1866. They declare all people born in the United States, regardless of race, previous condition of servitude, they're all free. So to enforce these rights and prevent Southern resistance, Congress passes the Reconstruction Act of 1867. This places the South under military occupation, okay, until all states ratify, which means approve, the 14th Amendment before they can be admitted to the Union. So until you agree to these amendments, you cannot be admitted into the Union, and we're going to have Union military occupying your state. So this act also mandates that all new state constitutions must grant voting rights to all adult males, regardless of race. So this is going to be a revolutionary shift in American democracy. So by 1870, every former Confederate state had met all of the conditions and was officially readmitted into the Union. So this phase of Reconstruction, it represents a very ambitious time, an attempt to rebuild the South and really protect these civil rights, which are going to continue to be undermined by things like Jim Crow. You had the black codes, and then you had Jim Crow laws. All right, so we're going to talk about the amendments, which are, very important, and you need to know all the different amendments, and you're going to need to know them for STAR too. So you have, at this time of Reconstruction, really trying to create some very solid things that are protected, and to protect the rights, that going forward in shaping and building our new nation, these things are going to do what they're meant to do. So you have the 15th Amendment in 1869. Okay, we have more southern states have rejoined the Union. Republicans feared that the civil rights, that these could be reversed, that eventually African Americans who were just being empowered would lose their rights, and we'd go back to where we were before. So these amendments are designed to guarantee, in this case, just African American men the right to vote. No women had the right to vote at this time. You're not going to get the right to vote until 1920. And we are, 1869? Okay, so this particular amendment is for African American men to vote regardless of race, color, or any previous condition of servitude, whether they're enslaved or not. So it goes into effect 1870, and this is going to just be a major milestone in the struggle for equality, okay, and expanding democracy throughout the United States. So while this amendment was powerful and a very powerful legal tool, many southern states are going to later use the tactics like literacy test, poll tax, additional tax, different ways of trying to suppress the black voting rights, because they don't want newly people who are just freed to be able to vote on laws and different things, because they want to keep them suppressed, right? So this is going to be challenged, and this is going to be challenged for generations. Different ways to create laws to keep the black community enslaved, different ways to take away having any say in government and any change, and this is what's going to continue. Okay, so these are considered the Reconstruction Amendments. 13th Amendment ended slavery. 14th Amendment grants African American citizenship to female and male. 15th Amendment granted African American men only voting rights. And then, like I said, they're going to try and create all different things to make it very difficult, like we still do, for different people to vote. All right, so despite the promise of what we can call the Reconstruction amendments, there's going to be different issues that happen. Okay, so these are kind of referred to as the failure of the Reconstruction amendments. So the First Amendment abolished slavery. So while slavery was officially ended, you have different systems that are going to be created, convict leasing, where you're going to have African Americans convicted of all these fabricated crimes. Stand in where you shouldn't be standing, walk in a certain way that you shouldn't walk. All these different ways to incriminate them, because then they're going to be put on a chain gang and forced to work. Okay? So then they also have sharecropping, and this becomes a very widespread idea where, look, you can still work on the plantation you were working on, you know the area, you know the job, but they're going to do it in a way that the people can never get out of a cycle of debt and poverty. So they can never kind of pay off their way or pay off whatever they're being given. If they're given a place to sleep, then they are never going to be able to work enough to pay whatever it is that they have to pay for that place to sleep. So it's just another way to keep people enslaved. So some of the things with the 14th Amendment are going to be with the southern states. They do what they're going to call black codes. These are per state, okay? These aren't federal. So black codes are going to be different, what they call vagrancy laws. So you're going to have to work for white employers, often who their enslavers were. They're going to be threatened with arrest all the time. The Supreme Court is going to fail to enforce their civil rights and their protection. They're going to be discriminated against, okay? So all of this stuff is going to start happening. So then you have on the 15th Amendment, you have when African American men are granted the right to vote, they're going to face intimidation. You got to imagine if for years and years, like take you as a teenager or young person, you grew up a slave. All of a sudden you have freedom. You're not going to have any idea what to do. And then you have the white man who has been intimidating you and has had you enslaved your whole life. You're going to be frightened of him. These people they're going to lynch, which is hanging. And all of these things are going to be done to the African American community to make sure that they are, suppressed, so they are held down, so they can't vote. And we're talking about the South and the Southern states. So you got to just kind of imagine what a very, very hard time it is going to be for these newly freed slaves, especially if they stay in the South, which they will. That's the only area they know. So in this particular place, they're going to create a poll tax. Well, you have to pay. If you want to vote at the poll, you have to pay. They're not going to have money to pay. A literacy test, sorry. Well, it was illegal to teach slaves how to read and write, so they're not going to pass that test. And then a grandfather clause. If you weren't already voting before this date, well, you weren't because you were a slave. So they're going to do everything they can to make sure that black voters cannot vote because, of course, voting is how we change the country. Okay, the end of Reconstruction. So this is going to just be a very controversial time period. The election that's coming out, we're talking about the 1870s. You have Republicans. They've lost their influence in both the North and the South. They're being blamed for what's called the Panic of 1873, which is this economic downturn, and it's going to be widespread. You're going to have unemployment, instability, financial instability. You've got all these other social and cultural and everything going on, plus the damage of the Civil War, physically, on the terrain. So you have, running in this election of 1876, you have Democrat Tilden, and he is going to win the popular vote, but the results are contested in several different states. So you have supporters of Republican Hayes, and they're going to challenge the outcome, and this is going to lead to a standoff. And we are going to, of course, have a compromise. So the leaders who are trying to take care of this crisis and resolve this crisis, they're going to create what's called the Compromise of 1877. Hayes would become president, but in return, federal troops would withdraw from the South. And this is going to, as soon as they withdraw from the South, this is going to end Reconstruction. But this is also going to lead to the dismantling of the Freedmen's Bureau, which was established in 1865. And the Freedmen's Bureau, again, this is kind of, a lifeline to the formerly enslaved people. So with federal oversight gone, Southern Democrats, known as Redeemers, they regained control of the state government because the Union's gone. They've ended Reconstruction, so we're done. And they dismantled the Freedmen's Bureau, which was that lifeline for the former enslaved people. So, not a good time. So, the New Democrats, which are known as Redeemers, they're going to regain control in the southern state governments. They're going to roll back many of the civil rights, all these different gains and progress that were made during Reconstruction are just going to go back. The compromise is really this turning point for African Americans in the South. They are left very vulnerable. They're left without military protection, and they're going to be left to discrimination and violence. All right, so let's talk about the Freedmen Bureau. So it's established in 1865, and like I said, it was this vital agency to really help assist the formerly enslaved people, and also the poor whites during the South during Reconstruction. So it was a way to get relief. It was a way to get food, clothing, education, legal support, because all this stuff is still happening to the newly enslaved people. So it helped millions transition from slavery, if you could even imagine what that transition would be like, to be enslaved and all of a sudden free with nothing. So it was just this vital part of it. So it's going to be one of the lasting achievements that it really established a way of helping people. It's going to, at the end of it, it's going to have created over 3,000 schools, several universities. It lays a foundation for African American education in the South. It helped legalize marriages for formerly enslaved couples. It helped reunify family members who had been separated during slavery. So despite all of the accomplishments, it was underfunded. And then it had, of course, a very strong resistance from white Southerners. They're going to opposed to racial equality, so they're going to, oppose any federal intervention, any federal institution that was helping the African American newly freed enslaved people get educated, get fed, get legal. Of course, they're going to oppose that. So as soon as the South regains control through the government, they're going to dismantle it. And then you're going to have, of course, violence, local hostility, and a lack of support. So the Bureau is going to be abolished in 1872. Still definitely had not completed its mission, what all it wanted to do, but it does have a legacy in American history of really just being a very positive institution that did help to transform lives during this time period. Okay, so one of our last slides discusses the end of Reconstruction. We talked about Southern Democrats. They regained control of their state governments. These are known as Redeemers. They're white Southerners. And their whole goal is to restore pre-war social and political norms the best that they can. So this, of course, is going to be at the expense of African American rights and their freedoms, right? They can't go back to slavery because there's an amendment, abolishing it, but they're going to try and go as close as they can. So you have groups like the Ku Klux Klan. It's going to be founded in Tennessee in 1866. White Southerners. They're going to operate as a secret society. A lot of high profile people are in this. And they're going to, of course, violently attack the civil rights, the voting rights of African Americans. They'll use terror, imitation, murder, anything they can to suppress the black political vote. Because if they don't suppress the vote, then they're not going to be able to, create this white supremacist ideology. So local governments are going to fail to act. Congress responds by passing enforcement acts which made it a federal crime to interfere with elections or deny equal protection under the law. But, that's not going to stop a group of people who are going to terrorize African Americans to try and make sure they don't make it to the voting poll. So the Ku Klux Klan, will continue. This is 1866. It's not till 1965, that's 100 years, until the 1960s that you even have Martin Luther King, and you're familiar with the different things that go on then. So this is kind of the beginning of a long fight for equal rights. And like I said, 1920 is when women gain the power to vote. All right, that is it. We are done with the Civil War.